It's a weird meeting today because there's both. Is it this one? Yeah, I didn't see it. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's what and I left a message for Bev, and I said exactly who, I don't have all the details on the bus, I said I'd rather see exactly what. This is the other thing. I was going to ask. I'm sure it's nothing.
Call this council and committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, Your Worship, with the exception of Councillor Butler.
Thank you. At the outset, I want to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Mississaugas of the New Credit, and the Anishinaabe people. We have a few announcements this morning. I just wanted to briefly mention the performance that's going on in Ridgeway last weekend, Friday and Saturday, this coming Friday and Saturday, by TASK, which is Therapy and Alternatives for Special Children. A group headed by Walter DeVoe and Nancy Kaser have been working with special children. Some of them are adults. Each year, for the last several years, to put on a musical, which they hold at the Crystal Ridge Center. And it's unbelievable how much time and energy is put into the enterprise, and it's unbelievable the impacts that it has on those individuals who participate. And the last few years, they've been very fortunate. They've had a star singer, Selena Carlson, who is unbelievable. So last year they did The Little Mermaid. This year they're doing Mamma Mia, and it's about as uplifting an experience as you can possibly imagine. So I want to congratulate all of those who have been involved in putting together that performance, and the individuals who participate in it, and the Ridgeway Lions who prepare the meals each evening at the Crystal Ridge Center. Friday and Saturday, I suspect that the tickets are sold out. They've done a tremendous job. So congratulations to them. I did want to make a brief reference to a program that's been talked about in this council chambers, and that is the Smart Niagara investment program, which the region has tried to kill the last few years. It keeps being resurrected by the elected officials because we know that it's a very good program. It's part of a program to invest in improvements in our downtown areas. Fort Erie and every other municipality in Niagara also has their own program, so there are two programs, local and upper tier level, that assist individuals to make improvements to their storefronts, as an example, or to create apartment units above commercial stores. This year, the region has put the program back into the budget after initially trying to take it out of the budget, which is good news. But there are a couple of wrinkles still to be worked out, and I wanted to thank the councillors for supporting our efforts to get that put back into the budget. Councillor Tom Encina, who is here, regional councillor, I want to thank him as well for his part in getting that back in. So as I said, there's a couple of more wrinkles that need to be worked out, but we're going to be working on that. Third thing I wanted to comment on was the Fort Erie Fire Department and its smoke alarm, carbon monoxide alarm initiative in Fort Erie. Each spring around this time, they go into a neighborhood and ask people if they can inspect their homes and see what kind of equipment they've got in terms of fire safety. And this past weekend, they did it in the north end of Fort Erie, and again had a very successful day. The public education group is quite large. I would say there must have been 10, maybe a little bit more of the public education volunteers. So it was really quite an effective enterprise. It's very important because it deals with the safety of our homes. And as the chief will say, there are three really basic levels in firefighting. The first is education. The second is safety and protection. And the third is firefighting. Is that correct?
You're correct, sir.
Great, thanks. See, I was listening. Anyways, I want to commend the fire department and the volunteers who work with public education because they're doing a fantastic job. And for all of you who have smoke alarms or carbon monoxide alarms, it's good that you've got them. You also need to make sure that they're functioning, so please keep an eye on those. A number of the homes actually had fire extinguishers, which is quite remarkable, although you have to keep them away from the burning elements in your home. So congratulations to the Fort Erie Fire Department. And also, I wanted to mention that we welcomed Picard's Peanuts to Fort Erie. We had enough councillors there for a quorum. We had councillors Noyes, Dubineau, and McDermott, and I was there as well. Picard, this was their 6th store in Niagara, and they've indicated that they've been doing very well at the Fort Erie location, and I have every reason to expect that they will do extremely well once our summer residents show up, because it's a fantastic facility with great products. And then finally, I wanted to mention that Niagara is one of the 9 regions and counties that is being reviewed by the provincial government with respect to governance. And there is an opportunity for residents to make submissions on the province's website with respect to their views about local and regional government. So I urge everyone to take the opportunity to do that. Our town Facebook page and website makes reference to that. But it's very important that the government in Toronto hear what people and businesses have to say. So we encourage you to get involved in that initiative. There are no addendums to this evening's agenda, so that takes us to declarations of pecuniary interest. Are there any this evening? There being none, that takes us to notice of upcoming public meetings, and we have a public meeting on April the 15th, which is next Monday at 6 p.m. here in the town hall with respect to a rezoning brought by Mars Homes, and that's at the property at the southeast corner of Michener Road and Schooley Road. And the information report with respect to that application and public hearing will be on our website on Wednesday, April the 10th. We now have a public meeting this evening, and we're going to hear from staff briefly, I believe, with a presentation regarding storage containers. And then we will hear from the public, individuals who wish to address council with respect to the matter. Good evening, Ms. Dolch. You're up.
Good evening. Thank you. On September 25th, 2017, Council asked planning staff to prepare a report with options on amending the town zoning bylaw 12990 regarding the use of shipping containers on all properties. Staff prepared report PDS 85, 2017, which provided options to regulate shipping cargo containers in all zones or all zones excluding residential zones. On November 20th, Council authorized staff to initiate an amendment to the town zoning bylaw to address the reuse and temporary use of shipping containers, including permanent shipping cargo containers in residentially zoned areas. The proposed changes to the town zoning bylaw 12990, which is the subject of this public meeting, is to permit with specific parameters converted and non-converted shipping cargo containers and the temporary use of shipping cargo containers in most zones in the town of Fort Erie. In addition, staff is proposing changes to the town site plan control bylaw to require that converted shipping cargo containers are subject to site plan control. Notification of this public meeting was provided in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act by placing a notice in the Fort Erie Post on March 14, 2019. So why are they being used currently in the town of Fort Erie? Shipping and cargo containers are now readily available to the general public to purchase at a low cost, between $2,000 and $4,000. The reuse of these are seen as green construction. They're reusing these cargo containers that have been previously used. They are airtight and rodent-proof storage options. And then the perception is that they're a cheaper alternative to accessory structure. And the reason I say perceived is that the structure on your left, which is the brown Lifetime Rubbermaid type container or shed, can be purchased for about $2,199. The cargo container can be purchased on Kijiji for $2,150. And they're both of similar size. So what are these containers being used for? They're being used for accessory buildings, single detached dwellings, restaurants, coffee shops, theaters, schools, workshops, indoor gardens, farming pods, portable toilets, a number of uses they've been used for. So what are the negative aspects? The negative aspects are that explosions can occur if not properly ventilated. For example, in BC, a 20-pound propane bottle was stored in a shipping container and it exploded and blew one of the 250-pound doors 40 meters or 130 feet away. This is where a building permit is necessary to ensure the containers are properly ventilated and engineered to protect the public from future hazards. Most of the containers have been used for shipping and the floors are treated with pesticides, so contaminants are an issue. Again, this is where a building permit can assist in ensuring these units are properly ventilated. And lastly, it's the negative aesthetics for a community and a neighborhood. These structures aren't designed for aesthetics, they're designed to ship product over long distances. As such, they're difficult to visually integrate into a residential and commercial areas or other sensitive areas. And that's what you see. So the issue for the municipality is they want to turn this into this. Now, I'd like to just go over what's currently permitted in the town for these cargo shipping containers. So right now, they're prohibited use in all zones. So as you can see, a cargo container is prohibited from locating or storing on any land for any purpose whatsoever. It does, however, permit cargo containers on a temporary basis in the industrial area for the intended purpose of shipping to a maximum of 6 containers for no longer than 2 years. These are detailed in section 622 and 636 of the town zoning bylaw. So what we're proposing is a few definitions. The first is being shipping and cargo container. Shipping and cargo containers are those generally used for their intended purpose of shipping. There's a detailed explanation there what it includes. But they're not converted. A converted container is also defined here, and that's something that's converted to a new use. And these would be subject to site plan control because they're not used for their intended purpose any longer. We're also proposing a new definition of charitable institution and vehicle body. Vehicle body is suggested as a new definition because in the definition of shipping cargo container, it excludes a vehicle body, which isn't currently defined in our bylaw, so we do need to define it now. Charitable institution, this definition, we wanted to make sure it's clear that charitable institutions would qualify for a container for charitable purposes, so we made sure that we had a definite definition of what a charitable institution would consist of. We are also changing sections in the prohibited use section of the bylaw, and we're going to clarify that items listed in 622.10 are those not normally used for their intended purpose. So we're just doing some clarification in this section. We're also adding a new exemption, which is 655, shipping and cargo containers in agricultural, rural, and industrial zones. So it kind of alludes that there is some other exemptions. And then in addition, that converted shipping and cargo containers or shipping and cargo containers are prohibited still in hazard zones, environmental protection zone, dune protection zones, environmental conservation zone, or any property designated under the Ontario Heritage Act. So for temporary uses, and these are uses that are only there for a short period of time, in industrial zones, they shall be permitted as long as they're behind the main building, screened from view from any street or road allowance, are set back a minimum of 3 meters from all side and rear property lines, and are temporary, meaning no longer than 18 months, and they cannot be stacked more than 3 high. And these are to provide industrial operators the ability to continue to use those cargo containers for shipping purposes. Institutional zones, we are proposing a maximum of 2 shipping cargo containers in any institutional zone for charitable purposes in conjunction with a charitable institution. And as I alluded to, we have a definition of that. As well as a school, provided they are not stacked, they're located behind the main building, they are screened from view, they are set back a minimum of 3 meters from all side and rear property lines, and are temporary, meaning each container may only remain for a period not exceeding 18 months. Temporary residential zone uses. In this case, it's more for moving or renovation, so we're proposing a maximum of 1 shipping cargo container permitted in the driveway or side yard of a residential property for moving or minor renovations, not requiring a building permit, for a maximum of 60 days in any calendar year, and for 1 shipping and cargo container in a driveway or side yard for major renovations, which do require a building permit, for a maximum of 180 days. The restrictions on this is that it's set back 1 meter from all property lines. It does not exceed a maximum height of 3 meters and a maximum length of 6.1 meters. Is not located in any site triangle and is not located in any required parking space for the dwelling unit. Accessory residential uses. What we're proposing here is a converted and a shipping and cargo container, and as I indicated, converted shipping cargo containers do require site plan control. In the agricultural and rural zone, we're proposing a maximum of 1 converted shipping cargo container as an accessory to a residential use, provided they're not stacked. Residential, again, a maximum of 1 converted shipping cargo container will be permitted as an accessory residential use. Again, no stacking permitted. In institutional and public zones, we also permit 1 converted shipping and cargo container for an accessory use. Again, stacking won't be permitted, and you will be required to meet all the provisions of that zone, similar to the other 2. Open space zones, we will permit a maximum of 2 converted shipping cargo containers, and again, subject to the accessory use provisions in the open space zone. Converted shipping cargo containers as accessory uses in commercial zones. In this instance, a maximum of 1 is permitted in the core mixed use 2, CMU2 zone, core mixed use 4, CMU 4, CMU 5, CMU 6, the urban entertainment center zone, and the local commercial zone, as well as the C2A zone. And in this case, you're only allowed 1, again, subject to site plan control. In the C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, CMU1, CMU3, ECU, and MS zone, which is the Motorsport Speedway, and the ECU's existing commercial use zone. These are zones which are more prevalent on the large arterial roads or in areas outside the boundary in a commercial area. We're proposing a maximum of 2 converted shipping and cargo containers. We are also permitting a maximum of 1 converted shipping cargo container if you have a residential use associated with your commercial property, because residential uses are permitted above commercial uses, or above the commercial use. Again, stacking will not be permitted. Now we move on to just shipping and cargo containers. These are not subject to site plan control. So they are permitted in the agricultural zone, a maximum of 1 shipping and cargo container per 4 hectares of lot area, not exceeding a total of 4 shipping containers on an agricultural lot. The container must be screened from view, located behind existing buildings or structures. Stacking will not be permitted, and they'll be subject to the accessory use provisions in each zone. The rural zones have similar provisions, except that a maximum of 1 shipping cargo container per 2.5 hectares of lot area, not exceeding a total of 2 shipping and cargo containers on a rural lot. Again, similar provisions. They have to be screened from view, not stacked, and located behind existing buildings. In the industrial zone, shipping cargo containers are permitted as accessory use, provided they are located in an interior side yard or rear yard and screened from view of any street or road allowance. Stacking shall not be permitted and subject to the accessory use provisions in each zone. As indicated, the town is looking to change the site plan control bylaw in this case and to add a definition of converted shipping cargo containers and requiring site plan control for all converted shipping cargo containers. Staff had 3 design options prepared that can be used by residential property owners to submit as part of a site plan control application. These design options were created to address the expensive site plan control for residential homeowners to help make the process affordable to residents. Generally, these packages include site plan details and structural design elements, which will be required as part of a building permit application. These converted structures can also be used in other zones, provided they are acceptable as they are designed for residential accessory use. These options were detailed in Appendix 3 to the report. However, incorrect versions of option 2 and 3 were included in the package inadvertently. The correct versions do not result in changes to the look of the structures. Just the details, such as aluminum siding, is permitted, whereas option 2 said is not permitted, but option 1 says it is. So where have we been? A notice of open house went out on March 8th, 2018. The open house meeting was March 21st, 2018. Staff have been considering comments and suggestions and have prepared the site plan concepts in Appendix 3 with an architect and an engineer. Notice of the public meeting was posted on March 14th for this public meeting tonight. The public meeting is obviously April 8th, which is tonight. And in the future, what are we looking forward to? Possibly a new public meeting, depending on what we hear from the residents and constituents of the municipality, as well as a further recommendation report and bylaw amendments should council wish to do so. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dolch. And I believe between this public meeting and a recommendation report, there will be agency comments?
That's correct. We haven't yet circulated to agencies until we know the direction we want to head in, for sure.
Thank you. Do any members of council have any questions? Councillor Dubin.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and thank you very much, Ms. Dolch, for your presentation and also all the work you put into the report. We really appreciate that. One quick thing that you had during your presentation that I was just wondering if we could get clarification on. You had mentioned that storage containers would still be prohibited in zones with an environmental conservation overlay. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, how would that affect residential properties that have an environmental conservation overlay with regard to the residential temporary use as well as the converted use? Because I know in Garrison Village, like on Jordan Drive and a few other areas, there are residential properties that do have an environmental conservation overlay over top of the entire property. Would they be prohibited from the temporary use even for the purposes of construction or moving, or are we looking to maybe massage that out?
Thank you. They would be prohibited from the environmental conservation zone, and I'm going to explain why. The environmental conservation zone is an overlay zone. once you actually do an environmental impact study or go to our environmental advisory committee to show your plans and they can remove that EC overlay zone, you can then build. Until that time, there is really no building permitted in those zones, even if you wanted to do a garage or any other construction. Once that's lifted, then you'd be applicable, the residential zone underneath would be applicable, and you could put your shipping cargo container.
So if someone was doing this temporarily, like loading a container in their driveway just for the purposes of I think you might have answered that with regard to the construction, but even if it's, cleaning out their basement or something like that and they have a container there, that would also be prohibited even for a temporary use with this overlay in place?
That's correct right now. We would have to just look at it. Obviously, we want to make sure that the Environmental Advisory Committee gets to comment before things are placed in the environmental conservation area. So if it was just in a driveway, obviously they would have no issue with that.
Okay, perfect. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other councillors? Councillor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Reddekopp, too, Mrs. Doltigan. Thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that there was one explosion in BC. Are you aware of any other incidents where there's been an explosion in one of these containers?
There's been a couple in BC. One killed a firefighter. A similar example. I didn't include it in my presentation because our previous presentation kind of included all the gory details of that. But there has been a number of them. There is a report that they've looked at and why they explode. And generally, what they've said is it's just a perfect storm because they're airtight, and explosive materials like propane, gasoline, anything like that shouldn't be stored in these because of that, because they're airtight and with heat.
Thank you. A further question? And I didn't see this in the report anywhere, perhaps I missed it, but you repeatedly put in the report and not stacked. Is the reason for it not being stacked a height issue, an aesthetic issue, or a safety issue, or all the above?
Depending on the zone, sometimes for an industrial zone we allowed some stacking, but we don't want to see accessory uses for industrial stacked or the residential stacked because, again, they could put them together and say they're technically one. We want to make sure one is one, not stacked, and for height.
Have you, one further question. In the converted shipping cargoes, that looked really nice with the siding and the new roofs and that. Has there ever been an estimate to what it would cost to convert one of these containers to improve the aesthetics?
It would depend on the materials you use, but no, we haven't got a price quote for that, no. But it depends on what options you choose, right? If you were to choose a cement siding, obviously that would be more expensive than your vinyl siding. So it just depends what option you choose.
As a follow-up to that, but the base that this container has to be put on, is that not fairly extensive with the pillars and the pavement and all the supports that have to be put there?
Again, it can be on gravel as well. So there is some options there. You can have the foundation option or just on gravel as they've indicated.
Okay, thank you.
Other councillors? Councillor Luberts?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Reddekopp. Thank you very much, Kira. I just want to touch on you're saying that the containers are airtight, and I'm just wondering if I can get something or a report that shows us that, because from what I understand, they're vented, and if they're vented, I don't know how they become airtight. But if you could provide me with that information that shows that they are airtight, I'd like to see that.
Sure.
And as far as explosions, can you also take a look at how many explosions of cylinders, propane cylinders, have happened in, say, regular sheds or garages in Canada? And you had a slide up there that had prohibited
Before
uses.
you continue on, Councillor Luberts, is that a question that you're asking?
Yeah, I'm asking if
What was the
she could
answer?
provide it.
I haven't looked at explosions in sheds or garages, but I can look up that information and provide it to you.
Right.
All right, now you had a slide, I think it was the one titled Prohibited Uses with the zoning. Wasn't it the beginning?
Go back here.
said something about it's not allowed whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, this one here. For any purpose whatsoever, any design. And that's for any zone?
Any zone, yeah.
So we don't have any zoning in Fort Erie that would allow for containers or truck bodies or anything.
No, other than the cargo container zone, 6.36 for temporary uses for an industrial or prestige industrial zone, yeah.
So there's
That's
no
the only
zoning that allows any of this.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thanks. And I'm just having a problem with this converted container, your definition there. And a converted, to me, converted would mean you did something to it and converted it so that you could use it for this purpose. And from what I see, and most of the people that are using these containers, I don't see any conversions to what they're doing. They're bringing in a sea container or a storage container, and they're putting it on the property, and they're opening the door, and they're storing stuff in it. They're not converting anything. And I'm wondering if there could be a converted as per what your options were when you put the siding on it and put a roof on it and all the other stuff. To me, that would be converted for some other use, or a repurposed. Instead of, like, you got a sea container, instead of using it to ship stuff across the ocean, now you're repurposing it for storage of your, on your commercial or residential property. Now, that makes it a little bit more understandable. You're repurposing or you're converting.
Councillor Lubers, do you have a question?
Pardon me?
Do you have a question?
Yeah.
I think you started off wanting to know what her definition of converted use was.
Can you tell me what the difference is between converted and repurposed?
Sure, through you to the counselor. The shipping and cargo container, they're metal boxes, but they're meant for transport. They do put goods in them, but they transport them. That's the purpose of them. The converted cargo container, it can be used for a variety of purposes. And again, they're not being shipped anymore. They're not for shipping. They're not meant for their intended purpose anymore of shipping. So they're converted to do a different use, similar to an accessory structure. They're being converted to accessory structures, to commercial buildings, residential buildings, farming pods. They're being converted to another use.
Yes, I understand that. But what I'm seeing in town is they're not converted. They're just being used for storage instead of for shipping.
Okay, Councillor Lubers, this is an opportunity to ask questions. We've got a
I'll bring
public
that.
meeting and people are going to,
Yeah,
you
I'll
can
bring
raise
that
it.
up when the report comes up.
That's fine.
But,
That's when you
all right,
should.
thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Any other councillors before we go to the public? Thank you very much, Ms. Rose. So at this point, if there are individuals that would like to address council with respect to the proposed changes to the bylaw, you may come forward one at a time. Who would like to come forward first? Mr. Steckley? And I'll need your name and address for the record as you come up and address us. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Bob Steckley, 617 Niagara Boulevard, Fort Erie. On November 20th, 2017, I made a delegation here to council to speak to report PDS 85 2017. It was an information report on shipping cargo containers. As a result of that delegation and then the subsequent decision of council, report PDS 21 2019 is before us tonight. Although I'm in favor of allowing storage containers, I'm here to speak in opposition to some aspects of the report. Most of you know I'm a lifelong resident of Fort Erie. I've been a business owner in town for more than 25 years. Currently, my business has two 20-foot shipping containers that are used to store cardboard boxes and empty plastic bottles for use in my business. I've counted over 50 businesses in Fort Erie that have shipping containers on their property that are used as additional storage for their business. We like these containers because they are built stronger than an aluminum or wood shed, and they're rodent proof, and they can be locked up more securely than a wooden or aluminum shed. The report before you tonight discusses the various aspects of allowing shipping containers to be used in various zones throughout Fort Erie. I have a number of concerns about the report that I would like to address. Page 32 of the report states that all units are subject to site plan control and must not have any holes or rips. They must not be rusted, cracked, dented, or twisted. Enforcing this recommendation will ultimately make most of the units in Fort Erie unusable. It's almost impossible to find a storage unit that doesn't have some blemish or rust on it. The fee proposed is $747 for site plan control, and then units larger than 10 foot would also require a building permit. You can save the $747 fee if you choose to do one of the 3 design options in Appendix 3. Although this sounds like a good deal, the cost to put siding, a roof, and the footing work needed would be far greater than the $747 fee, so in reality you're not saving anything. And siding the units for aesthetics would mean drilling hundreds of screws into the unit to attach the 2x2 strapping that the siding gets fastened to. This means hundreds of holes that moisture can get in and rust can start. The report says all units would require a window to be installed. This now affects the structural security of the unit and should only be necessary if the unit is used for housing. I can put up an aluminum shed from Canadian Tire and it doesn't need a window. Why should a storage unit need one? Page 44 talks about the doors on the unit and to change the doors over from the current door that's on there. This now affects the structure of the unit as well as the security of the unit, and I feel it's unnecessary. Page 45 talks about 20-foot units, and you only need to have a minimum of 75% coverage of siding on that unit. The rest can be painted. If it's okay to have 25% of the unit painted, why can't the whole unit be painted? It would be less noticeable all one color. Pelham, Lincoln, St. Catharines, West Lincoln, Port Colborne, Brantford, and Hamilton all allow storage containers in some or all zones. None of those municipalities require units to be sided and have windows installed. In fact, I couldn't find one other municipality that would require this. I believe the fees and the design features recommended in the report tonight are excessive and are making a simple issue too complicated. I believe most owners of these units wouldn't have a problem with a one-time licensing fee of $250 per unit, or the cost of a building permit if the unit is large enough to require it. The units would have to be in good shape and be painted the color of the closest adjacent building to blend in, as mine are. Appropriate setbacks from property lines would also have to be observed. As long as no flammable liquids or explosives will be stored in the unit, then no additional venting is needed, as all units already have venting. On behalf of myself and the other business owners that need these containers, I'm asking council to find a way to allow these containers without raising the bar so high no one will be able to get over it. If other municipalities can do this, why can't Fort Erie? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Steckley. And okay, so I'm going to ask you folks not to keep clapping after every presentation, whether you agree or disagree, because I don't want to hear booing either. Can we have a copy of that presentation for the clerk, or have you already?
I can leave that with you, yes.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to ask councilors if they have any questions. Councilor Noyes?
Thank you, Mayor Redekop to Bob Steckley. You have 2 units on your property. How long have you had them on your property?
It's been about 7-8 years that they've been on there.
Have you had any, if I can continue, have you had any complaints?
I've had no complaints at all. I've actually had some compliments from the neighbors about them.
A further question, what is your property zoned?
We're a bit of a dual zoning. We're right off Jarvis Street, so we fall within the core commercial zoning. So the back part of the property where the commercial business is commercial. The front where the house is residential. We pay both taxes, residential and commercial.
Why did you, further question, why did you decide to use storage containers as opposed to, like you talked about the Canadian Tire sheds or?
The one that was shown in the picture up here, side by side with the storage one, I believe it was vinyl or plastic. The security of the storage, the steel storage containers, you can't beat. You can't buy a unit out there that comes close to comparing to it. My previous delegation, I mentioned that I had a large tree branch come down on top of my one unit. It put a dent in the top, but if it had been an aluminum shed, it would have been crushed. If it had been a wooden shed, it would have gone right through the roof. So the security, the safety of it, the rodent proof, the health department likes them for that reason. I went with it, 1, for the cost, 2, for the ease of it. 3, I don't intend to work till I die. I hope to be able to retire someday. When I do and the business is no longer there, I'd like to remove those units and have the space to do with as I please. So,
One further question. If council decides to follow the recommendations in the report regarding commercial, industrial, and residential use, how will it affect your business, and what situation would it put you in?
well, if they follow the recommendation tonight, it would allow for 1 on residential, which I would fall under. It would allow 1 for core commercial, which I fall under. In speaking with Ms. Dolch and staff here, they believe that I would be allowed both if the full recommendation was covered tonight. In the event we only go with just commercial and no residential, then I would be forced to remove 1. In the event you go with neither commercial or residential, I'd be forced to remove both. It's funny, this afternoon when Ms. Dolch and I were talking on the phone and we got off, my wife said, what would you do if they make the decision not to allow these at all? And I didn't have an answer for it. I don't know. It's hard enough to be in business without constantly struggling to stay in business. And I really don't know what I would do if I had to move them.
Any other councillors? Thank you very much, Mr. Stackley.
Thank you.
There was a gentleman at the back. Yes, please come forward, sir. Good evening.
How are we doing? Hey, Ray Demra, 2327 Dominion Road. We're all on here about sea containers. Meanwhile, I was hoping I would already have been, but they don't open till April 10th. Huge advertising inside Toronto's new 100,000 square foot marketplace made of shipping containers. They're making it out of shipping containers. They have restaurants in it. They have food and retail businesses, cultural and entertainment programs. So how is it they can have this many containers sitting on a piece of property to use commercially, to have people even accessing, going in and out of it, and have food inside these containers? And now all of a sudden, we here can't use shipping containers for the purpose they are made for, is to preserve and keep property safe. Why is it we cannot, especially the ones on property that are so nicely and decorated with the rest of the business around, they are imposing absolutely no harm to the public. If anything, they are actually probably protecting the public more. When they are closed, your belongings in there, you're not raccoons and squirrels entering your container for what you have in your container compared to a shed you've got in the, compared to a shed you've got in the backyard. So why is it that Toronto can have 100,000 square foot marketplace, public, made out of shipping containers? My second question is, if I own private property and I am paying for the mortgage for that private property, who are you to tell me what I can and cannot do on that property? If you can do that and tell me about shipping containers, why do I own the property? Next it'll be, oh, you can only have 2 trees. Next it'll be, oh, you can only have 2 cars parked in the driveway. Who has the right to property? That's my question.
Well, the Municipal Act gives us the ability to do certain things by bylaw, and that's what gives the municipality the right, not just Fort Erie, but every municipality. In terms of your first question, we can have our staff look into that, but I'm quite confident that there's planning approvals that were required in order to put up that type of facility.
It could be, but what I'm saying is they are showing absolutely no harm in shipping containers. They are even making restaurants out of them. I would like everybody to look it up. It's on the Star, and unfortunately, it doesn't open till the 10th because I would have been to go see what this looks like. But it's made out of shipping containers. They know it's safe and secure to the public who's going to be traveling in and out of it. So why is it they can't have a shipping container on their property to use for storage? It is absolutely safe to the public, the personal belongings, the animals. I don't know why, if we own property, now all of a sudden we're going to be told what we can and cannot have on our property. Next it'll be what? We can only have 2 cars parked in the driveway? That's where I'm going. I have no idea where and what rights we have to impede on private property. And like you look at the car wash down there, those containers are absolutely beautiful back there. They're causing absolutely no harm to no one. And if you have stuff in it, they are so protected. So I don't see how he is causing any grief to the environment, to the city. That's where I'm going.
Thanks very much, Mr. DeMoon. Any questions by any members of council? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Anyone else that would like to address council? Mr. Couts, please come forward.
Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I'm going to be wearing 2 hats tonight. My name is Charles Couts, K-A-U-T-Z. I live at 3247 Thunder Bay Road. My first hat will be as the president of the Federation of Fort Erie Waterfront Property Owners and the Bay Associations. We're very concerned about this bylaw in the sense that waterfront property by nature is also zoned hazard land and environmentally sensitive. And we take exception to the fact that while our property tax bills zone us as residential, that the environmental or hazard lands may supersede that, and we cannot do certain things on our properties with this, sort of as this gentleman inferred with another property that had just an environmental overlay on it. So on behalf of 850 waterfront homes from Port Colborne to the Old Fort, we do take exception to this, and I hope that you have some sort of resolution for something like that. My second...
You know we don't have any jurisdiction over Port Colborne.
I said from Port Colborne to the fort. Okay, I understand that.
Thank you.
My second hat will be as a private citizen and as an urban planner. You know, I've been following these council meetings for over 35 years, and I'm just mind-boggled sometimes. The previous gentleman spoke about Favreau's storage. And this whole scheme here, you have no plans for storage facilities, rental storage facilities for people in town that can't have something on their property, but they want to rent something, okay? Something that's secure. I won't repeat what the other gentleman said, but yes, that's a handsome business compared to other things. And you folks have them in court for the 3rd time. You have 80-year-old people in court for storage containers because it interferes with the Spears Road subdivision or the Alliston Woods subdivision. And it's maddening. You're making a family spend...
Mr. Coates, I'm going to ask you to stick to the bylaw, not presenting a case before us for property owner that's in violation of...
Yes, I will stick to the bylaw because I will refer back to when this bylaw was first passed as only for prestige industrial. I spoke at that point, which was in your first term last time, and I said how ridiculous it was because of the world operates on shipping containers. So please make considerations for storage container businesses without going back after them for a third time. And in terms of fire and explosion risk, that happens to every kind of structure. And if we're so concerned about fire and explosion risk, I recommend you look at the Rose Hill Auction House with dozens of trailers parked a foot away from each other, if not less, 4 feet off the ground, stacked with all kinds of flammables and who knows what else. So there's 2 acres, including fences made out of pallets, which is legal in this town. There's 2 acres of fire risk that apparently you've already subject them to a site plan agreement. So it looks like that has worked well. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Just to comment about, I think you said that there are no plans in town for any type of storage facilities. There actually are. But they have to go through a planning approval process.
Even if they've been grandfathered?
Well, if they're prohibited and they're illegally utilizing the property, there is no grandfathering. So,
well, let's look at Putney's, for example, or Mr. Favreau. Yes, I'm sorry.
So there is on Bertie Street, adjacent to or just down the road from Canadian Niagara Power, there is a storage facility. That's gone through an approval process.
Right, and those are also fiberglass and subject to damage and other things too. It's not a...
I'm just responding to the comment that you made. So there actually are storage facilities.
Right, and there's a grandfathered from the 80s and 70s. From when I was a little kid, it was a storage facility, Putney's, that you seem to have these old people in court for the third time. So
That's completely inappropriate, and it's not.
It's the truth. So if anyone has any questions, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Anyone have any questions of Mr. Coates? Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else who would like to address council on this issue? If there are none, then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed. And as you heard from Ms. Dolch, the next step will be to take into account these representations that were made this evening, as well as additional information that we received by email. Then there will be a further possible public meeting, depending on what comes out of agency comments. But you'll all be made aware of what comes next. Eventually, there will be a recommendation report, which council will deliberate on before a bylaw changes are made. Okay? So this meeting is closed. And that then takes us to the consent agenda. And any of you are here who wish to leave, this will be your opportunity to do that. Did I miss something? See if this one works. Okay, that takes us to the consent agenda. And would anyone like either of the reports removed from the agenda? Does anyone have any, can I have a mover then for the consent? Councillor Noyes, you have a question? Yes. Or did you want something removed from the agenda?
No, I had a question.
Sure, go ahead.
In regards to the, I'm not sure what page it's on, well, Land Committee on page 5, it talks about the agreement with the Boys and Girls Club of Niagara, 20 Lewis Street.
Right.
What, and it basically say, oh, we'll follow up, and I haven't had a chance to talk to them. What is the current arrangement?
Of the facility?
No,
the building?
The Boys and Girls Club of Niagara. The agreement, our agreement with the Boys and Girls Club of...
Yep, Mr. Cookett.
Through your worship to the councillor, we have agreement with the Boys and Girls Club to rent space at the, we call it the Methylatum building. That lease agreement is up for renewal, so we've been in negotiation with them. They're making some changes to it. I'm just waiting for them to get it back to us, and then we can review it again.
Thank you.
Any other questions with respect to the two reports? I had a question, Chief, with respect to the report relative to the replacement of the filling stations. And I noticed that one of those is at Central Station, or I guess what you call Station 2. What is the general lifespan of these types of units?
Your Worship, the two compressors that we have presently that are going to be replaced with Council's approval are over 25 years old. The one at Station 2 or Central Station is 5 years old. It was put in place knowing that we would need to upgrade it to a 4,500 PSI with a filling station, but the largest amount of the cost has already been put in place.
So this needs to be replaced because the regulations have changed.
That is correct.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? All those in favor then of the two reports? None opposed, that is carried. That then takes us to Planning and Development Services, and Councillor Noyes, you are the Vice Chair, so I'm going to hand the chair to you.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop. Planning and Development Services is now in session. There are no presentations and delegations. That brings us to report number PDS 14-2019, sale of limited marketable land, parcel 1-0 Richmond Avenue, lot 580, plan 480, Birdie, for Erie, Carlos Gomez Rodriguez, and Alyssa Ballin. Report's now on the floor. Any comments or questions? Seeing that, I do have a question for Ms. Dolge. I know that it was Councillor Butler who asked that this be postponed so she could have more information. Did she have an opportunity to discuss it with you?
Through you to the councillor. No, she has not. I haven't heard from Councillor Butler on this matter, no.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, it was actually deferred, I think, because I had requested it. I was concerned about this, and I tried to make a contact with Mr. Rodriguez myself, but Ms. Dolge had done that. It's the subject of her memorandum. I did have a communication with Councillor Butler earlier today on another matter, and this issue arose, and I indicated to her that I was satisfied with the explanation that was outlined in the memo, and she seemed to be in agreement with that.
Thank you. And all those in favor of the report? The report carries. That brings us to report number PDS 21-2019, information report on shipping cargo containers, zoning bylaw amendment, and changes to the site plan control bylaw. Any comments or questions? Mover? Okay. Thank you, Councillor Zanko. Any comments or questions? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just when I was going over the report at home, it mentioned that they weren't allowed to be rusted or cracked or have any dents. And do we have the same rules for all storage units in town? And I'm talking about these metal sheds that we buy from Canadian Tire or Home Depot or whatever. They get into somebody's yard, and now all of a sudden they get a dent. Do they have to remove them and replace them?
And Councillor Luberts, I'll direct that to Ms. Dolge.
Through you to the councillor. So the biggest concern is in discussions with the building department is that these structures are obviously for transportation, not necessarily for storage or snow loads and things like that that they're concerned with. There are some other concerns in terms of holes and are they structurally sound. So when you do an accessory structure or anything like that where you require a permit, you do have to make sure you have to submit the building plans and things like that. In this case, you would submit structural engineering drawings with that building permit for these containers. And the concern was if they have holes or rips or anything like that, they may not be structurally sound. And again, when we proposed that they can't have any rips or tears or rust, those are for the residential ones where we've provided already the structural drawings, the engineering, and the architectural controls on them. And that's because some structural engineer has already signed off. As long as they don't have any of those things, building staff can confirm it, and then they can go ahead to building permit without any additional work. If you are a commercial owner, let's say, and you can't use one of those design options, you can look at ones with some rust or holes, but you're going to have a structural engineer sign off that they are structurally sound for your intended purpose that you want to convert to.
Councillor Lupert?
Yes, thank you very much. But these containers, I'm sure that they're engineered, and they're engineered to go across the ocean on a ship. I'm sure that they're going to meet the standards when it comes to structure.
Ms. Dolch?
Is that not true?
Through you to the councillor. No, in discussions with the chief building official, that is not the case. They're not concerned necessarily about the four corners of the building. The four corners are structurally sound. It's the roof loads. They aren't designed for this, or the walls aren't designed for this typical use.
So do we have cases where these containers, the roof is caved in because of the snow? Do we have anything like that available?
Ms. Dolch?
To us?
Through you to the councillor, I can provide you with something. The chief building official had some documentation about the snow loads and the concerns of the snow loads on the shipping containers being used for other purposes.
All right, thank you.
Councillor Lupert? Anything further?
Yeah, thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I was reading in the report, there was something about 20-foot units and 40-foot units. And then it said that the 40-foot units are not allowed, but then further in the report it talked about the 40-foot units. Are they going to be allowed or not?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the councillor, and that is my error. I do apologize. As I indicated in my presentation, options 2 and 3 were the wrong options. Actually, option 1 was correct, but options 2 and 3 in Appendix 3 were the old options where the architect was proposing 40 foots, and we've actually we asked him to remove those. So in the options that I didn't attach, unfortunately, and I do apologize for that, it does indicate that only 20-foot options are permitted. And I do have them available. I could show you on the presentation screen. I just will have to bring this back. But generally, 20-foot containers are the max at this point.
Councillor Lupert?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And on page 7 of the report, fee schedule, the $747 fee. Why is it that we have to have such a large fee? If you want to put a storage unit on your property, if it's less than 100 square feet up around there, then you don't require a building permit. But if it's over 100 square feet, you require a building permit. Now, you bring in a storage unit, it's already there, it's built. So why is it that we have to charge them $747 for the fee and then a building permit fee on top of that? My impression was that we were going to make some changes to the bylaw, and staff was concerned that they wouldn't get a building permit fees because the unit's already built. So the fee to have it would replace the building permit fee. And I think that the fee should be whatever the building permit fee would have been. Is there a reason why we're not doing it that way?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the counselor. So as indicated in my presentation, we are requiring converted shipping cargo containers to go through site plan control. The current fee schedule for site plan control without an agreement is the $747. Obviously, we did hear from the public at the open house that this was a higher fee, a high fee for some residential homeowners. So what we decided to do was provide those options so that we, again, could control aesthetics generally through site plan control. And in order to do that, you'd have to pick one of the three options to avoid this fee of $747 because the review's already been done. Should you propose something new, we'd have to look at it on a staffing level, and that's where the charge would come in. In terms of building permit fees, there's always a requirement for a building permit fee if it's over 108 square feet. That's just a requirement under the building bylaws.
Councillor Lupertz?
Yeah, but I think that was one of the concerns, or am I not correct? That because it's a sea container, you can just buy it, bring it, and set it on your property, and you weren't going to get a building permit fee. Now, what we're going to do is get a building permit fee, and even though you're not building anything, you're just setting it on your property. But why is it that we can't just say if it's, well, 100, let's say it's 120 square feet, then you have to buy a permit to put it on your property that would be equal to if you built something 120 square feet. It's the same thing, either a sea container fee or a building permit fee, but it should be the same amount for the same size.
Councillor Lupertz, I think in one case this is not a permitted use. That may be part of the answer, but I'll let Ms. Dolch.
Through you to the counselor. So the building permit fee is not even, it's not included in this report. It's a per square foot fee. And I can't tell you, it depends on the use you're proposing. There's a number of charges. But it's no different than if you bought a, like the plastic shed I showed you. If it's over 108 square feet, you still require a building permit.
Yes.
Councillor Lupertz?
But you would also, but you wouldn't pay the $747.
Dolch?
Correct?
Through you to the counselor, that's correct. But again,
Yeah,
in this
okay,
case,
that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah,
Let's get to the building permit, that's it.
we're proposing the site plan fee, again, to control aesthetics in this case. I know there was a number of residents and councillors concerned about aesthetics, as well as staff were concerned about aesthetics and how these look in neighborhoods. Obviously, we want to make sure the urban neighborhoods and the rural and agricultural look good for the long term. Obviously, people coming to town, we want to make sure they look, the town looks represented, well represented. So we proposed the site plan to control generally aesthetics in this case. Building permits can control a number of other things, but not aesthetics. And that's why the fee's in place.
Councillor Lupertz, I'm going to let other members of the council have an opportunity to ask questions,
All right.
and then I'll get back to you. Any
Okay,
other
thanks.
councillors? Councillor Dubineau?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And just through you to Ms. Dolch, I want to thank you for the report you put together again. It was very extensive, went into detail of a lot of the proposed changes, and I want to thank you for that. There's two things I want to touch on, if I may. One is the commercial, industrial, agricultural aspect, and separate that from the residential aspect. I want to touch on the residential aspect first, though. Certainly, I can understand the need to regulate storage containers within the urban residential area. I don't think it's unreasonable. I mean, you've got houses, 50-foot lots. The last thing you want is to have someone 2-3 storage containers that, kind of almost dwarfs the rest of the lot. So I can see the need for that. My concern comes to properties that are zoned neighborhood development, and we spoke about this on a little earlier about how these zones are within the urban area and would be considered residential, but in a lot of cases, these are very large parcels. They don't have immediate neighbors, and so to limit an individual on this type of property to one container may not, I guess the word would be, the type of use within that property, even though it's considered urban residential, the effective use is more rural in nature, perhaps agricultural, perhaps rural along those lines. So I'm just wondering, going forward, if we could have any consideration, perhaps in regard to neighborhood development lots, maybe even carefully rural residential, but we got to be careful with that because of how the neighborhoods for those are set together. Just perhaps a usage. Perhaps to allow multiple containers on neighborhood development depending on the size of the lot. The second point I want to bring up with regard to commercial, industrial, agricultural, and I got to touch on what Mr. Steckley had said earlier about business owners in town and the struggles that business owners have. The last thing I want to do as a councillor sitting here is to make it difficult for a business owner in Fort Erie. And when I have a resident standing here who has 2 containers right now and is mentioning that they don't know what they would do if they were limited to 1 when they've had 2 containers for 8 years, that's deeply troubling to me. I think we need to be very careful with how we regulate these containers on commercial, industrial, and agricultural properties, especially since we've had these being used for such a long time. The fee is concerning. I can understand the need for a building permit. I don't think that's unreasonable. There's a lot of concerns within that aspect. So I'm hoping going forward, this report's for information purposes. I hope as we go forward, we get more input from stakeholders in the process that we can hopefully iron that out and separate the need to regulate in residential areas versus the need for businesses to utilize these in commercial, industrial, and agricultural areas. And I appreciate all the work you put into the report, Ms. Dolch. Thank you very much.
Ms. Dolch, did you want to comment?
Thank you. Through you to the councillor. Sorry, I wouldn't mind just commenting on one aspect, only just for clarification purposes as we move forward. As I did hear Mr. Steckley's presentation, the commercial unit, so even if you put an accessory structure on a commercial property, you are subject to site plan control. So in all instances on a commercial property, you're subject to site plan control. So that wouldn't change per se, depending whatever structure you put on. So just to clarify, if we did get rid of site plan control on commercial, it would be for all buildings where we'd have to specify what we were looking at specifically. But generally right now, if you were to put any accessory unit on a commercial property, you would be subject to site plan control. So you just we may want to be careful on how we look at that. But we can look at a reduced fee perhaps if council felt inclined to do so.
Any further questions from council? Mayor Redekop?
Just wanted some clarification, if I could, with respect to some of the comments in the report and the reference to the storage containers being utilized as accessory, 1 in the residential zoning, 2 in the open space zoning. What does that actually mean in relation to residential and open space accessory?
Ms. Dolch?
Accessory means accessory to the main use of the property. So in the case of residential, it would be accessory to the home. In the case of open space, depending on what you had on that open space use, because there's a variety, a golf course, obviously they could have an accessory building to store products or things for maintenance. So it's just accessory to whatever use would be on that open space zone. If it was a park, perhaps to store park equipment, things like that.
Then I had a question, if I might, Madam Chair, with respect to the cost of the designs. I think that was a question that was asked. And I can't imagine that using one of these designs and upgrading a storage container wouldn't cost a lot more than $747. Is that, do we have any Any feel for that?
Ms. Dolce, I think I asked that question when
Yeah.
you were up there, and I don't
You
think
said
you had
no.
the answer then. Do you have any more information?
Through you to the mayor, no, I don't at this time, but I can look into that. What I can do is try to find an estimate based on the lower cost options of vinyl siding, things like that. Obviously, as you go into the cement board, it will become costly, but it depends on what you want your unit to look like.
Thank you, Mayor Redekop.
And then just to I guess one other question. I tried to go to the town's website and the zoning maps, and for some reason I'm not able to pull up the maps, but I think where I live is zoned neighborhood development on the Parkway.
Through you to the mayor, along the Parkway, it's a bit of a mix. I'd have to look exactly, but it's either rural residential or in that area. You might be neighborhood development where you are, but
Well,
it depends on what section of the Parkway.
yeah, and I know there's neighborhood development parcels in the area in Ridgeway outside the urban boundary, but I'll tell you, I wouldn't be all that happy to have one of these things in the backyard of my neighbor. I don't care what it looks like unless it looks like a nice shed, but I wouldn't be too impressed with my neighbor if one of these things showed up in his backyard. Thankfully, I don't think my neighbors are planning that, and I wouldn't want to approve it in any event. My biggest concern is not so much the people that are utilizing these and taking great care to make sure that they look presentable in the neighborhood and that they're not really interfering with other use. A lot of them are screened, they're behind buildings, what have you. So I don't have a great issue with that, but it's like everything else in life. It's the people that seem to have difficulty living by any real standard that creates the problems for everyone else. And so whatever changes we make, we're going to have to try to make sure we contemplate that. I did have one final question, and I know I did ask Mr. Steckley to provide us with his presentation. And when that does come in, Madam Chair, I trust that will be circulated to members of council.
Through to the mayor, yes, it will.
Thank you. I thought the comments were very thoughtful, and I know that Mr. Steckley would have put a lot of thought and consideration into the presentation, so looking forward to getting the hard copy of that. Thank you.
Any further, Councillor Lupertz?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. I just wanted to get a little better clarification on the foundation part of the report. I see there's somewhere where it shows sleepers, pressure treated, looks like a 6x6 or something. So we can put, so in other words, what you're saying in here, it looks like you can put like a stone and then a 4x4 or 6x6, and then put the container on top of that, right?
Councillor, Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the counselor. Yes, that's correct. There's a couple of options, but wood sleepers is one of them. On a 6x6 or 8x8 wood sleeper with the gravel type base. But you have concrete piers, granular base, concrete slab, or wood sleepers. Those are your options.
Councillor
Okay.
Lupertz?
And I guess where I'm trying to get at with this whole thing, and when I remember bringing this forward in the beginning and looking for something to help these businesses in this town, right? And I requested that we at least give something for the commercial properties. And seems to me that from what I'm hearing, that staff is definitely doesn't want to see it on residential, right? But I'm wondering if staff could come back and when you go through these here and you're looking at the options, this and option that, after a while, you get mixed up in it and you're thinking, well, does that include the residential or is that commercial? And I'm wondering if staff could come back with a residential aspect and then a commercial aspect, commercial, industrial, and agricultural combined, right? So that we can keep them separated. And then we're not getting confused as to, well, no, that's for residential and this isn't. And I'm wondering if staff could do that when they come back, before they come back with a bylaw. And I would like to see that the fees be drastically reduced from $740 to a couple hundred, maybe $250, like Mr. Steckley mentioned. And to give these commercial property owners the opportunity to bring in a sea container and not convert it to something, just to repurpose it for what they're doing. And if you want to drive by Mr. Steckley's property, you'll see he painted it the same color as the buildings around it, and he planted it in his yard, and he uses it for storage. But I don't see anything in here that would allow just that and give him a fee of how much that would cost. And I think that a lot of commercial property owners in this town would be very happy just to be able to put a sea container, use it for storage on their property, and pay a fee. But I don't see that in the report. So I'd like to have something like that.
I think there was a question in there in regards to separating in the next report, separating commercial, industrial together, separating residential from the other zones. Would that be possible in the next report?
Should council decide that that's what they want to see, that's definitely an option. What I would like some clarification on, if possible, is obviously if we separate out commercial and Councillor Luberts indicated not require anything but allowing them to drop it on, we would have to modify our site plan control bylaw to allow any commercial structure on any property, or we'd have to specifically mention shipping containers would be exempt from site plan control, whereas all other structures for commercial would require site plan control. So I'd like some direction on whether we're opening up the entire site plan bylaw or just for shipping and cargo containers.
Again, I don't know what
Well,
Councillor Luberts was going to be recommending.
Yeah, I think, Madam Chair, what I'm trying to get at is that would be incorporated in the report. And if you could, but I think that if we add something like that in the next report, then we can decide, okay, are we going to eliminate residential? And then that's completely eliminated. Now we're just dealing with agricultural, industrial, and commercial. And then we can focus on that, and then we can decide how we're going to go about it, if there's going to be some fees or whatever.
If I understand Ms. Dolch correctly, she was wondering, getting some clarification, if council was asking her to basically just kind of waive all the rules when it comes to sea containers, that they could just come and put them on their property, and and that would be the beginning and end of it without any requirements or regulations or any site plan control. That is not what you're recommending.
Well, I think that would be embedded in the report, but I'm not saying that, well, we completely get away from site plan control, but I'm thinking that what I'm seeing in this report when it comes to site plan control, when they talk about it at the beginning of the report, it's talking about how they control everything about the whole aspect of it, and then the aesthetics of the unit, and how you can do this to the unit, and how you convert it, and do all those things, which, I was going to say Councillor Steckley, but it's former Councillor Steckley. But anyway, in his presentation, he said, he didn't do anything. He just bought it and put it there.
I think he painted it. You painted it.
He painted it, okay. but the unit itself, right? So I'm not talking about converting and doing all that. Can't we have something in the report where you can go get a sea container and this is what you have to do to get it on your property? But he doesn't have to do any converting. And like I said, I asked the question about bringing me the report where it shows that these things are not subject to any kind of snow load, because I think they can handle the snow load that we got in our area. And I think that these units are sound enough to be used as a storage unit in our town, right?
I think Ms. Dolce has answered that question a little bit in regards to the snow load, that she would get back with that information to you. I'm just wondering, Ms. Dolce, to try to clarify without it, like, I mean, I know Councillor Lupert's thoughts on this, but perhaps could there, I know in other reports it was like option, we're just talking about commercial, let's say option A is basically you pick it up, you put it there, you know, and that's the beginning. And others that they have a great deal of site plan control, which requires conversion, and there's perhaps a middle ground in there someplace. Could we, the next report option 1, 2, and 3, because I personally would see some need for some control. Anyway, is that possible, Ms. Dolce?
What we can do is provide options, obviously, being no aesthetics, no cladding or anything like that. We can provide those options to you should you wish to go down that road. So we can definitely put that in the next report to give you options to choose from, if you so wish.
I know I would appreciate that. That would give us an opportunity of looking at the different issues. Anything further, Councillor Liberts?
Yeah, just one little thing there is, when I was reading the report, I was just curious as to Councillor Steckley. He was here previously at another meeting, right? And he made a delegation, and that wasn't in the report. And I'm wondering, was that an oversight, or was it misplaced?
Ms. Dolce?
His comments weren't in here.
Through you to the councillor. In this section on the residential comments, there were a number of comments. Some were Mr. Steckley's in there.
I think they were included in the chart that was provided.
Chart, yes. So we just
In
took,
one
we
of
took
the
the summary.
appendixes?
No, it's in the body of the report.
It's in Appendix 4. We had a public comment summary. I didn't allude to who said the comments, just general comments that we used and how we addressed them. So that
all
was
right,
Appendix
because I was
4.
looking, I see
Yeah.
that there was people that sent in letters and stuff, but his wasn't, nothing was from him, but okay, if that's the, but I hope that at least we have something that we can look at that for commercial anyway, because to me, that's where I was going right from day one, and I hope that somehow we can accommodate our commercial friends in our town.
Thank you, Councillor Liberts. Any other questions? Mayor Redekop.
Yeah, I just want to state that, you know, to some extent, sorting through the options, that's our job. And it's clear we can adopt what staff is recommending. We can do anything under the sun differently. I think it's helpful if staff focuses us a bit. But, you know, the issue of whether we want to prohibit these in a particular zoning, that's up to us. And, I mean, I think it's self-evident that that is an option to us. We could say, can't do this in a residential zone, or you can do this in a residential zone. Here's what it is. So I think I don't want to be putting Ms. Dolce to a lot of extra work, doing things that we should be doing. I think it's an excellent report. It's very detailed. It is quite complex, and we've heard, she has summarized a lot of the comments. A lot of the comments have been taken into account when she's provided us with recommendations as to what amendments could be made. Obviously, there are some others that need to be taken into account, such as the comments we heard tonight, and there undoubtedly will be some, I would think, from the agencies that we hear from. So there may need to be an update to us as to what she's finding out before we get the final report. But I think it's helpful for us to be able to rely on our staff and for them to give us some general alternatives and options, but, you know, that's ultimately going to be our decision.
Thank you. Any further comments? Councillor Lupertz, this will be your last.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Mayor Redekop's comments, and I understand where Mayor's coming from, but at the same time, right, we're looking at a report, and if I could have been at home and picked out all the little pieces that I would like to see in one little section over here, and I could have brought it to this council, and we all would have had to debate mine, and someone would say, well, I think we should add that into it, and I think if it's better if we have a report in front of us, here's an option for all of us to look at, instead of me creating one out of a report. That's what I would like to see. I understand staff is busy. I understand that we have a responsibility as well, right? But we get reports on a regular basis with options, and you can do it this or you can do that. And you mentioned it yourself, Madam Chair, earlier, that we get options. So that's all I'm asking for.
Thank you, Councillor Lupertz. I do have some questions. I think I'm allowed.
Yep.
In regards to the commercial, I notice that it's kind of a one-size-fits-all, and I'm using that term loosely, in the number of containers that are allowed on a commercial property. But yet there's commercial properties that are 2 to 3 acres, and there's commercial properties that are much, much smaller. And I had an opportunity of actually going to visit Birdie Tire today. This would affect them significantly. They have a number of containers, and I went to the back, and to be perfectly honest, I think I drive past that place at least probably 20, 30 times a week. And I didn't even know there were storage containers back there, and they back onto the industrial park behind it, where there's sometimes, they said, like more than 50 trucks parked there with the trailers and things like that. And one of the owners mentioned to me that it would be a huge problem for them if they could no longer use the containers, and two would not even come close to meeting the needs of what they're currently used for now. And they have a number of them. I didn't count them, but they're all filled with tires, and and appropriately so, to to safeguard their to safeguard their goods, and to make sure they're properly weatherized and stuff like that. Is there any way, I know that when you talked about the agricultural, you were basing it on hectares. If you had so many hectares, I think every 4 hectares you could have 1 container or something. Could we look at, is it possible to look at commercial sites, and that if the property would suit more, like in other words, they would do the proper setbacks and all that would be in the backyard, or the aesthetics would still be there in regards to you can't see them from the road, so to speak, but that the number be a little bit more forgiving in regards to the size of the commercial property itself, as opposed to saying, okay, commercial, it's 2.
That's something we can consider. When we looked at this, obviously it was very generalized in terms of residential, commercial, industrial, just grabbing the big zones and looking at them on a holistic level. In terms of looking at individual properties, our original thought was, should somebody require more than, let's say, 2, they could apply for minor variance or other amendments to kind of make sure that on individual properties that it works, and we wouldn't have an aesthetics issue or other type of issues. But I can look at it based on acreage and bring that option forward to council.
Thank you. And the only other comment I wanted to make is that when I read the report, I don't think there was anything there under residential that I did not agree with. I don't think having sea containers or cargo containers in somebody's driveway is a good idea, or backing onto somebody else's property without the aesthetic changes. So that part I can really agree with. It's the commercial aspect that I have some concerns with. Okay. Seeing that there's no further questions, all those in favor of the report for information purposes, the report carries. That brings us to report number PDS 22, 2019, Spears High Point Secondary Plan Parkland Acquisition. It does say confidential, but
Confidential memo.
memo.
I'll move that.
Comments or questions? Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, it wasn't clear to me whether this is going to form part of a larger park in that neighborhood, or this is going to be the park.
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor. If you look at Appendix 3 to the report, I know it's small and tiny, but you can see it does form part of a larger park over in that sector. So this is just one component to the larger park. As part of Alliston Woods subdivision, there will be a park dedication component as well as we have some road allowances that we would use as part of the park.
Thank you.
Mayor Redekop, any other further comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor of the report? The report carries. That brings us to report number PDS 23, 2019, Affordable Housing Action Plan.
So moved.
Any comments or questions? Mayor Redekop?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I want to congratulate and thank Ms. Richardson for the report. I also want to commend the members of the Affordable Housing Committee for helping to move this whole initiative forward. This is terribly important to our community, and at the meeting the other day, turns out that we're probably moving ahead more than any of the other communities in Niagara, at least in this regard. But I had a couple of questions, and the first one had to do with the summary of priorities, which is interspersed in various parts of the report. But I'm thinking that, and I'm looking at page 7, I guess, of the report. And I'm thinking that the region actually has a role for some of these things. As an example, the development charge deferrals, I would think that the region definitely has a part to play there, because if we're going to be able to move affordable housing forward and move with some of the initiatives that we're thinking of, such as secondary homes on certain residential parcels, we're going to need the help of the region. So would it be appropriate for the region to be added in to that priority in the strategy?
Ms. Dolch?
Through you to the mayor. Yes, we could look at that for sure. Obviously, development charges are both regional and town initiated charge, so it would be on both levels. And any of the others, the secondary suite policies are ours, but development charges in the CIP plans are both regional aspects.
In the actual strategy itself, that's on that list of strategic priorities is on page 26 of our total package. I'm wondering if that needs to be formally amended, or whether that would be amended. Well, why don't I simply move that we amend that priority, development charge deferrals, to include the region, unless there's some reason why we shouldn't. Ms. Richardson may know. And she's here.
Ms. Richardson?
Through you, Madam Chair. If you look at, and it's page 35 of 37 of the strategy, we do identify key stakeholders for the development charge deferrals, and we do identify the region. The chart summary is just sort of the key stakeholders. So it would be initiated by the town, but we would certainly work in conjunction with the region.
It does say key organization responsible, and so we're responsible. That's a big issue.
Yeah.
And I would have thought that maybe the region should be added in there. Is it a problem if it is?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, not a problem at all. Can I add that in?
So I'd like to move to amend the strategic priorities, that particular priority, to include the region as well.
What page are you on?
I'm on page, so it's page 26 for the strategic priorities contained in the actual strategy.
26 of the housing report, or the
26 of the package.
package? Just to bring to your attention, on page 35 of 37, it does give under 4.9 choose key stakeholders, and it does mention the implementation of this priority includes the region of Niagara, just?
Yep.
Okay, we're on page,
26. So I'm moving that where it says development charge deferrals, which is the second last priority, that we add the region of Niagara.
changes on the floor. Seeing none, can you please?
I think that was the only question that I had, but I'm quite pleased, and I'm definitely supportive of this.
Any further questions or comments? Councillor Luberts.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Just on the same chart there, under priorities, down on medium term, 2 to 5 years, and then the initiative, the density bonusing. Can staff explain what the density bonusing, what they're talking about?
I'm going to direct that to Ms. Richardson.
Through you, Madam Chair, to the councillor. Density bonusing is essentially, I'm just going to find it here. It refers to the practice of allowing developers to build additional density in exchange for providing affordable housing. So, for example, if someone were looking to put, say, a 6-story apartment building in, because that's what the zoning permits, we can actually allow them to go higher and do, say, 8 stories, provided that some of those units are affordable. So it's sort of giving them a benefit to provide affordable housing units.
So it would be more in line with community benefits. Is that what we're talking about? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. The reason I asked that, Madam Chair, I find it interesting that this qualifies for community benefits, but Harbortown didn't. I found it interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Luberts. Any further comments or questions? Seeing that I do have one. I notice under the same strategic priorities that you have development charge deferrals, and I'm just wondering if there was any thought to deferral of taxes, property taxes.
That's not something that we considered, but it's certainly something that I could look into. I don't know if there's a mechanism in place that would allow that. One of the options that we did, or one of the initiatives that we did recommend, was perhaps a community improvement plan. So that may work into some sort of a tax benefit. So with some of the other community improvement plans, thinking of the Brownfield Community Improvement Plan, there's a tax, basically a tax grant. So we could look at that as part of the community improvement plan.
Seeing none, the amended report is on the floor. All those in favor? The report carries. Thank you. That brings us to new business inquiries. Seeing none, that brings us to the business status report. Seeing none, so therefore I am going to, Planning and Development Services is no longer in session. I'll turn it over to.
Thank you, Councillor Noyes. That takes us to Infrastructure Services. I'll hand the chair to Councillor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. Infrastructure Services is now in session. We do not have any presentations or delegations this evening, and we do not have any reports. So does any member of council have any new business items or inquiries? Seeing none. Does any member of council have any questions regarding the business status report? And seeing none, so I will hand the chair back to you.
New record.
Yes.
That takes us to Corporate and Community Services. Councillor McDermott, you've got a really tight challenge there.
I know, it's a heavy one tonight.
Speak quickly.
Corporate and Community Services is now in session. We have no presentations and delegations. We have no reports. Is there any new business? Councillor Noyes.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. I do have a question. A while ago, we had a presentation by the EDTC, and I don't know if I asked it at that meeting or if I asked it in a phone call. I can't quite remember, about some clarifications for the visa statements, and I have not yet heard in regards to you know, if we can get a copy of the visa statements.
Mr. Cookin?
Through your chair to the counselor, I'll have to check with the acting GM on that. I haven't heard anything regarding the visa statements and the providing of those statements, so let me check with her. I can send you an email tomorrow just to see the status of that.
Thank you.
Anything further? Is there any questions on the business status report? Seeing none? Is closed.
Thank you very much, Councilor McDermott. That takes us to scheduling of meetings. Are there, well, we've got a strategic plan meeting tomorrow evening, starting at 5 o'clock here in the council, here in Committee Room 1, I believe. Yes, Councilor Zanko.
Thank you, Your Worship. There's also an EDTC board meeting tomorrow at 5:30 at the EDTC.
Councilor Dubineau.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. We have a Community Healthcare Services Committee meeting this Wednesday coming up. That is April 10th here at Town Hall in Boardroom 1 at 5 p.m.
Councilor Noyes?
Not a meeting, but it's a concern if there's two meetings happening on the same time, that both the two councillors for the EDTC and our strategic planning meeting, that means the council representation on the EDTC is not going to be present.
Yeah, I've already had some communication with Councilor Butler about that. I was figuring if the rest of you couldn't make it, then it'd be a pretty streamlined strategic plan, and it would look very much like my priorities, but I suppose some of you are going to show up. Yeah, I don't know, Mr. Cookett. We've already got arrangements made for Mr. McQueen to be here tomorrow, April the 9th, and this was a date that had been bandied about for a little while.
Yeah, to your worship, we were aware of the conflict. We discussed it with the EDTC, hoping we could reschedule it. They haven't had a board meeting in a very long time, and they needed to move forward with it. So we were hoping that the councillors could divide and conquer, and maybe one go to the EDTC meeting and one come to our strat plan meeting.
Do we have to start? So the EDTC meeting starts at 5:30, I believe, and we're scheduled to start when? Could we not start later? Could we not start at, say, 7 o'clock?
With the strat plan meeting?
Sure.
I'd have to check with
I
the...
don't know if that's agreeable to other councillors, but it's not a problem for me. Sure, we can, Mr. Cookett can bring coffee. Anybody have a problem with 7 o'clock?
Your worship, I'm not sure if the consultant's available at that time, so I'd have to check with them.
Yeah, why don't we find that out? I mean, otherwise we're going to have at least one counselor not available, and maybe two. So why don't you check into that, Mr. Cookett, and then let us know tomorrow.
I will, for sure.
Because if we can do that, then I would think most of the important business of the EDTC will be done by then. Okay. Any other meetings? Then motion to adjourn, Councillor Zanko. All those in favor? That is carried. That then takes us to, and we're going to go right into the special council meeting. So I'm going to call us to order. Madam Clerk, the roll call.
All members of council are present, Your Worship, with the exception of Councillor Butler.
There are no announcements. There is no addendum. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There being none, there is notice of a upcoming public meeting, as mentioned earlier, Mars Homes next Monday, April the 15th, 6 p.m. here. Rezoning of the property located at the southeast corner of Michener Road and Schooley Road. That takes us then to new business. And Councilor McDermott, I believe you have a resolution.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Zanko. Whereas 12.7 million Canadian volunteers give their time to help others, contributing close to 2 billion volunteer hours per year. And whereas the collective result of the work done by our volunteers is that the town of Port Erie is a more desirable place to live. Now therefore be it resolved that council proclaims April 7th to 13th, 2019 as National Volunteer Week, the volunteer factor lifting communities, and further, that council expresses our appreciation and gratitude to all volunteers in the town of Port Erie for their service, dedication, and commitment in lifting our community.
Thank you, Councilor McDermott. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? That is carried. Councilor Dubino, I think you have the next resolution.
Yes, I do, Your Worship. Thank you. Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Noyes, that in accordance with the requirements of expense allowance policy bylaw number 142-06 as amended, Council authorizes Wayne H. Redekop, Mayor, to attend the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Cities Initiative 2019 Annual Conference on June 4th through 7th, 2019 at the Blue Harbor Resort and Conference Center in the city of Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, can you just give us a little bit of background with respect to this? Because this is the first time in 4+ years since I was reelected as mayor that one of these has come before us. But as I understand it, except for AMO, this is something that's supposed to be done anytime a councilor attends a conference.
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct. AMO is the exception. Anything that requires an overnight requires a resolution of council. I believe Councilor Butler, I understand, I've been told now that she went last year. I wasn't aware of that, but it is on our radar now, so we will make sure that we pass these resolutions as needed.
I think she commuted every day between here and Montreal. Okay, so that's why this is on the agenda. It should be on, this should be on the agenda for any conference attendance going forward if there's an overnight stay. Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Sheboygan. It's not an easy place to get to. Okay, that then takes us to consideration of bylaws. And we only have one bylaw, so I guess that's the whole package. Councillor Zanko, you have first and second reading on that?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor McDermott, that bylaw number 39-2019 to authorize the entry into a license agreement with the District School Board of Niagara for the construction and use of field events facilities within Ferndale Park is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. That bylaw is on the floor for questions or comments. You recall that this had actually been a report with respect to this, and I had an issue with some of the wording, and I had an opportunity to discuss this with Mr. Lustig, the lawyer, who, as lawyers is wont to do, defended his position very strenuously and almost talked me out of making any amendments. But see, we don't have this attached to the bylaw. There are two very minor changes that I'm proposing, Madam Clerk, and I think we dealt with this at a meeting on, was it March the 18th? It was March the 18th. So some of you I don't think have possibly don't have the bylaw in front of you, the agreement. You have the bylaw, but not the agreement. So the first item that I was a little concerned about was the terms and conditions for the use of the lands. And the provision in the agreement, which is at paragraph 2A, talks about GFES having priority use of the lands between 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. on all regular school days to conduct physical education and or track and field activities in relation to the purposes related or noted therein. Then he added a new provision, new sentence, provided that the town be advised by GFES on a monthly basis, etc. that's a new sentence that he had put in. I think it should simply be a continuation of the first sentence, and that it should be comma after noted herein in the fourth line. Do you have this agreement in front of you, Madam Clerk? Do you have the bylaw package? It's in our March 18th meeting. So it's paragraph 2A, fourth line, the words noted herein. That should be a comment, and then that should continue on rather than a new sentence. So, would anyone like to move that? Councillor Luberts? Second, Councillor Noyes? Are there any questions with respect to that amendment to the agreement? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. The other point that I was concerned about was the burden of maintaining equipment. Paragraph 3D of the agreement says that the town agrees and will be responsible at its own cost and expense for ongoing maintenance and upkeep of the lands and equipment. There was a sentence added by Mr. Lustig, provided, however, that the DSBN at its own cost and expense shall be responsible for maintenance and upkeep of the equipment for events that it requires the equipment to be ready for. I had been concerned about upkeep and maintenance. It seems to me that if there is, it's a concrete pad for the shot put, I believe. For the javelin, I don't think there'd be anything, but for the shot put and discus, there is a screen that's going to be erected, and that might require some expenses. After having discussion with Mr. Lustig about this, I think that if the word general was inserted at the beginning of the second line, so that it reads, the town agrees that it will be responsible at its own cost and expense for ongoing general maintenance and upkeep, that would at least ensure that all we're doing is general maintenance. I'm assured by staff that the intention is that if, as an example, the mesh screen needed to be replaced, that would be DSBN's responsibility. Perhaps. So would anyone like to move that we add the words general? Councillor Zanko, seconded Councillor Noyes. Anybody have any questions on that amendment, proposed amendment? Councillor Noyes?
With that amendment, does that then kind of go the next step, that we are not responsible for the equipment? Does that phrase then be taken out of there and this one replaces it?
Just that we would be responsible for general maintenance and upkeep.
So,
and that would include, so, we're going to be cutting grass around the area. We're going to be maintaining the field. If there's garbage or something in the meshing, I think we would be responsible for getting that out. But if there was damage done, as an example, to the concrete pad, because knows why, that shouldn't be the municipality's responsibility. That will be the school board, and I'm assured that that's the intention.
and my concern is that you added, the way we made the amendment was to add, but we didn't
General.
replace. So are we adding and replace, so we're replacing the equipment, maintaining the equipment with this phrase?
No, because we're going to have to cut around the concrete pad, as an example. We're going to have to probably do some general cleaning around the area of the mesh and what have you. And I don't want to be nickeling and diming the school board on the one hand. On the other hand, I want to make it clear that we're just doing general maintenance.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions with respect to this? All those in favor of the amendment? That is carried. Did anyone else? Okay. Did anyone else have any questions or comments with respect to the agreement or the bylaw? It was in our the agreement. You would have seen it on March the 18th in our package. Okay, Councillor Luberts, you have third and final reading. Sorry.
Are we going to move forward with the last one as amended?
Yeah. So the amendments have been made, so now we would have to go to third and final reading.
As amended.
As amended, right.
Yeah, okay.
I don't think, who has that bylaw? Who has third and final?
You do.
Pardon? Oh, it was moved. Right. Okay. That was third and final reading. So, all those in favor of the amended bylaw? None opposed, that is carried. Okay. That then takes us to the confirmatory bylaw. Councillor Lubert, you have first and second reading of that.
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Redekop. Moved by myself and seconded by Councilor McDermott that bylaw number 52-2019 to confirm the actions of council at its special council meeting held on March 21st, 2019, and its council and committee and special council meetings held on April 8, 2019 is given first and second reading.
All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Councillor Noyes, you have the next resolution.
Thank you. Move of myself and seconded by Councillor Dubineau that bylaw number 52, 2019 is given third and final reading to be signed by the mayor and the clerk under the corporate seal.
Are there any questions or comments? All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. We've already had scheduling of meetings in the committee meeting, so we'll skip that. Councillor Dubineau, motion to adjourn.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Moved by myself, seconded by Councillor Noyes, that council adjourns at 7:59 p.m. to reconvene into a special meeting of council on April 9th, 2019.
All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you all.